welcome to Solidarity Live. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Alex Lawson. We've got a great show for you today. I'm really excited to talk about sort of the ongoing dumpster fire that is everything happening 2020. But we've got always that hope as well, and I think we're going to bring you some of that today. Our guest is an amazing organizer who has done such amazing work. I'm going to let Jocelyn introduce her.
Hi, Alex. Good morning.
Good morning.
We are here with the co-founder of the Women's March, Bob Bland, and she also has founded a group called Masks for America. But she's here in DC this week because she's been doing some tremendously important and brave organizing around the Supreme Court hearings. Good morning, Bob. It's great to see you.
Good morning, Jocelyn. Good morning, Alex.
So I don't even know where to start, but for those who haven't seen it, what were you doing on the steps of the Supreme Court this week?
Right. Well, for those of you who remember the Kavanaugh protests in 2018, it was very similar. This week, the Judiciary Committee of the Senate was doing basically a sham hearing, trying to ram through Amy Coney Barrett, who, if you remember, was actually the second choice besides Kavanaugh last time around in 2018 when they shoved through his nomination for the Supreme Court. So I was back with Center for Popular Democracy, Demand Justice, and Housing Works protesting a right-wing extremist who has only even been a judge for 3 years. She has very little experience. She has been groomed by the Federalist Society for the last 20 years, similar to Brett Kavanaugh. And she is, if anything, more extreme than Brett Kavanaugh. So Amy Coney Barrett is a threat to all Americans' rights, whether it be the right to choose, our health care, marriage equality, election integrity, and racial justice rights, and she needs to be stopped.
Well, and I mean, Alex, do you have thoughts here? Because I'm not trying to step over you, but I think
you were there, Jocelyn. You lead this discussion. You were there.
Oh, that's true. I was.
You were there, yeah, both of them.
Well, and actually, oh, Bob, that's when we met. Oh, that was a good part of the
I think that, well, you know, the community, I think it's important, again, that this is, if anything, more dangerous a nomination than Kavanaugh, because we will have now a 6-3 right-wing versus left-wing court. So this is not a balanced court. It's completely unprecedented to put on someone like Amy Coney Barrett in place of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because typically justices will be from a same, bent on the court when they're replaced, but the Republicans have been completely railroading through someone who is the antithesis. Like Amy Coney Barrett is the antithesis to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And so there was a few hundred of us throughout the week, over 4 days of protest, who came out to the Supreme Court and also to the Dirksen Senate building where the hearing was taking place, to show up and represent the majority of Americans, because 71% of Americans believe that the Senate should be passing COVID relief right now, not ramming through a justice in the middle of an election where 15 million people have already voted. It's time to let the people decide.
Well, and it's something that's really struck me about this entire process, and you keep bringing it up, is this, one, this is way more urgent than Kavanaugh. But two, the optics are different because it's an attractive white lady who's really good at playing into the white savior narrative with all her little adopted children, and she's so well spoken. And the thing that keeps me terrified about this is that we don't seem to be able to see when someone has bad interest if they're basically well spoken. And that's like I don't see Democrats as scared as they should be, the way that they were scared about Kavanaugh. Have you been getting that sense too?
Well, the thing is with Amy Coney Barrett, because she's only been a judge for 3 years, there's not a lot to go on in terms of her judicial record like there was for other previous nominations. She's unqualified for the Supreme Court just because she professionally, like if I had been doing anything for 3 years, I would not be qualified for the very highest position in that field. Like if I was a design assistant in fashion, like I was when I was younger, I would not be qualified for the creative director position that same year. So this is something where we don't know, because she also, Amy Coney Barrett, refused to answer any substantial questions during the hearing. So the truth is, we know what her personal beliefs are, but we do not know how she will rule, because she refused to answer questions even as simple as whether she thought the marriage equality case had been decided correctly. She refused to answer questions around her determining that in one of the very few cases we have that we can look at, that it was not workplace harassment to call a Black person the N-word. And she was not willing to talk about that case. And basically everything that, besides the only thing I did hear her say that was substantial was that she did believe racism is a problem in America, but she would not say the same about anything about LGBTQ rights, about disabilities, about women's rights, and particularly the right to choose. So we're getting a completely unknown into the Supreme Court. And I'm just honestly disappointed that the American people and protesters who have been out day after day after day in the last 4 years were out on the streets this week, but Democratic senators were not showing similar resistance.
Well, and yeah, no, what were you gonna say, Alex?
Just to build on something you're talking about, the most annoying. Do you know what kayfabe is? Have you ever heard of that from professional wrestling? It's the thing where everyone knows professional wrestling is fake, but when they get in the ring, they pretend it's real. It's called kayfabe. It's the whole thing. That's what politics is, and especially with the Republican Party. Like, there's a whole bunch of, we're pretending we don't know what she believes, right? We know exactly what she believes. She was grown in a lab. It's a right-wing welfare state that grabs these people when they're young, funnels money to them, and says, as long as you believe and tout these things, you will have a guaranteed job for life. You don't have to be good at what you do. You don't have to do anything. Don't bring notes to your Senate confirmation for the Supreme Court, because all you have to do is say, I don't recall what I believe or don't believe. So that's where we know exactly what she's going to do. It's a corporate court. She's put there to deny that the extractive industries are destroying the world. She's put there to ensure that women are subjugated under a patriarchy. She's put there to ensure that workers never have their voices heard. That's exact. But everyone in the political class, not us, not activists, we know why we're out there, but commentators in the political class are like, well, we just don't know. She wouldn't tell me. And they have like a smirk on their face when they do it. You know, the one that got me was, is Medicare constitutional? Well, Senator, I just don't know.
Right.
We do know. She wrote about it. She doesn't believe that Social Security or Medicare are constitutional. Her originalist thing doesn't believe that she should have the right to vote, or that African Americans have the right to personhood. The original Constitution was a deeply flawed piece of paper. The only thing it got right was that it had to change over time to reflect our growing understanding of who we are and values. And that's not what she is. She's a retrograde motion on that. So my non-question is more of a just thank you for not engaging in the kayfabe, you know, for getting out there and saying she should not get a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Tell me just a little bit about how you read what's going on, and what you think next, you know, what comes next in this.
Yes, and I want to also note that in every fight that I've seen so far in the last 4 years, women have been leading. And so it's important, and particularly women of color, all of the actions this week were primarily led by Ana Maria Archila and Jen Epps Addison and Jennifer Flynn Walker, and people who have been long time working for immigration rights, for marriage equality, for racial justice rights, because they are directly impacted, for workers' rights. And I think that the problem is that we are out there fighting for our lives, but the rich folks, like honestly, like the rich, comfortable folks in Congress who are on the Judiciary Committee, who don't have to worry about eviction, who do not have to worry about healthcare because they have healthcare for life because they're in Congress. I don't think most people know that they have the best healthcare available, TRICARE, and that they get it even when they're out of office. They don't have to worry about their salaries and about unemployment insurance and about all of the other things that we have experienced during COVID, like losing Medicare for all on November 10th. The reason why we were out there fighting this week as soon as the hearing started is because they're trying to ram through this before election day. You know, but a lot of people think top of mind that the reason why is so that Trump can steal the election. Maybe, but I think the primary reason the GOP is thinking is because of the November 10th Medicare for all, sorry, not Medicare for all, ACA ruling that is going to come through. There's a case coming up that could potentially fully repeal the ACA on November 10th. And they want Amy Coney Barrett seated before then, specifically so that she can strike down the ACA in the middle of the worst pandemic of our lifetime, when over 218,000 people have already died and 55,000 more are likely to die before the end of the year without COVID relief.
I mean, the brutality of it is shocking, and the lack of outrage on the part of the American public is shocking, I think. I think one of the biggest ways these people gaslight us is to make these structures so complex that people don't really understand what's going on. Because if you ask the average person how they feel about the Supreme Court hearings that are going on, oh, it's fine, she seems good, she seems nice. Why do you think that is, Bob?
Well, I think white women have always been protecting, generally protecting the patriarchy and upholding white supremacy. And a lot of that is because we're packaged as the gentler, fairer, more thoughtful, and of course, like you saw a lot this week, that every GOP senator, instead of treating her like a full human being, was just sitting there talking about her kids and whether she cooks meals at home. And literally, like, it was like the Handmaid's Tale, where she is Serena Joy. Like, if you watch that, she is consolidating her power within a structure where by her upholding white rich male power, then she's able to have at least a little power and get to feel better than the 90% of people out there who are subjugated. And she herself is also subjugated, and but she's willing to take that in stride because she has just enough. And this is a scarcity model that has existed in America since the beginning, that has resulted in white women and other oppressed communities committing horrible atrocities against those that are more oppressed than them. But to crystallize this power in 2020 into a Supreme Court lifetime seat that for at least the next few generations will affect my children and their children's children in a way that actually rolls back their rights to perhaps even less rights than my mother had during World War II. Is something that we can't stand by. The mass media is not prepared to report on this in a way that will hurt their bottom line. So what we see is that, shows like yours and then citizen journalists out on the front lines during the protests this week are covering the real story, but you're not hearing that, hey, you can do something.
Oh, I think we just lost Bob.
Oh no,
right
we
in the
lost
middle
Bob.
of her great point.
Well, here, should I text or call, see if we can get her back on?
Yeah, and I think right where she was is exactly something I talk about often, and I know Bob and I have talked about it as well, that the corporate media are never going to be our friends on this because they profit from the same power structure. So we're not going to look, there's Bob.
Hi.
I was
Hello.
trying to finish your point, but not doing nearly as good a job.
Well, it clearly must have been Zoom does not want me to speak. I'm just,
I think it's the telcos. It's not Zoom. They're not powerful enough. It's the telcos. The ISPs were like, shut it down.
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So at any rate, my point is that the mass media is not out there covering this. They're not telling people that, hey, even just a few dozen, like bring your friends, bring your family, even just hundreds of people collectively can make a difference in the perception of these hearings. I think the quote, if we, I'm gonna butcher this, but if we don't fight, they'll kill us and say that we enjoyed it. It comes to mind. And as somebody who just started doing this stuff, and I consider myself, even after everything, to be a relatively new activist. I'm still going through my 101 with reading all of the books like Stamped from the Beginning and, Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and all of these incredible fighters, Malcolm X, folks who had been doing this stuff for 40 years. There's nothing new about this. We call it unprecedented, but the truth is that it's now just starting to affect white folks. And now suddenly it's like, oh shit, but the truth is that Black people and other immigrants and other oppressed people queer people have been facing pure terrorism on every level of power, from the judicial to the legislative to the police, for since America started. That's really what America was built on, is domestic terrorism. And that's what we're going to experience with the courts if Amy Coney Barrett becomes a justice.
Well, and there isn't a way to make this sound more positive. And that's a thing. I mean, we have to be fighting like it is a fight for survival, because it is. Even if we weren't in the middle of a pandemic, which we are, these healthcare decisions have existential implications for millions of Americans, even without COVID. And then you add in the climate and the effects we're seeing of a warming climate now this year with the California and the Oregon burning. It's so easy to make these fights abstract, but they're not. It's happening right now. I mean, Bob, you say you're a new activist, but you're one of my activist heroes. How do you mobilize people? Like how do you get people to feel this urgency when you're doing this kind of work?
I think the urgency is there to the point that people are experiencing overwhelm and consumption of calls to action. So it's not that people aren't concerned. It's that they have been bombarded for the last 4 years by crisis after crisis after crisis, to the point that they want to do something, but they just don't know. So it's very different than 2015 and 2016, when a lot of folks, including myself, thought we were relatively fine and that we were a democracy and that things weren't perfect, but they were getting better. And 16 just completely obliterated this illusion that millions of us were under. And so I think what we're seeing here is that people can't do everything. And particularly during COVID, if you're immune compromised, if you're disabled, if you're elderly, that you have very real reasons to not physically show up. So I want to give a few different things that people can do if you are not able to actually come to DC or to sit outside of your senator's office in person because of the very real concerns of COVID-19. And that is that we need you to call not your GOP senators. I actually almost had to sit down when Cory Booker yesterday came out and spoke to a group of us protesting and told us to try to convince the GOP to stop the hearings, because that sort of disingenuous call to action that we know will not make a difference is not helpful. And in fact, it's insulting to those of us who are on the front lines to force us to, consider calls to action that we know won't work. The reality is, I want you to call your Democratic senators. I want you to call your Democratic Congress people. I want you to call Chuck Schumer, and I want you to call Nancy Pelosi. And I'm sure someone on this line is going to give you the congressional call number, because I don't have it in front of me right now. But you go to the congressional switchboard, you just ask for the person, you call, you leave a message. It really does help, because the more calls, they actually mentioned it in the hearing that they had been frantically receiving calls, and that does make a difference. Also, I want you to be sure to vote, whether it be absentee or mail-in or early voting. Definitely, if there's any way you can vote early, do so, because we do not want, perception is reality. And if the exit polls over the next 18 days sound like Biden is winning by a landslide, that actually affects other folks' votes when they go to the polls. So this is something where you can inspire someone to vote for Biden and to vote for some possibility of us digging out of this Trump era by letting people know how you voted and by voting early. So please go do that. Voting is happening all over the country right now and will until November 3rd. So try to do it early and make sure to get out and vote. That won't change these hearings, but it will change our ability to fight against a more predictable opposition. It just changes our opposition from being Death Eater fascists to being respectability corporate Dems. Which one would you rather fight? We use
the Ministry of Magic or Voldemort. These are our options.
Yeah. Because here's the thing, is if we use the same tactics that we have honed over the last 4 years against, Biden, I think we'll actually be able to make a difference, because this is someone who does care. He cares, and it's just about us being equally forceful and not stopping the fight. Now, I do want to give you one other call to action for this coming week. Center for Popular Democracy is having a day of action in DC on October 22nd. There are also marches tomorrow across the nation, October 17th, that are being put on by Women's March and other, women's groups and reproductive rights groups. And I want to urge you to do more than just march on Saturday, because that will, show that we are the majority, and that we believe that this is a danger, an existential danger to our judicial system and to our rights. But what we actually have to do is also show up where the senators are, who are on the Judiciary Committee and who are your senators in Congress, because next week it's going to go to a vote. It's called a cloture vote, I believe. And then from there, they're rushing as fast as possible. Mitch McConnell says the full Senate vote could be as soon as the 23rd. I think in reality, it's going to be the October 26th. Is what the GOP wants this full vote to be. And that's less than 1 week before the end of the election. So we need to slow down this process. And the only way we can do that is by showing our outrage and showing up for those who can't.
And I love that Bob, you are bringing home something that I think we all have to stay focused on. This is a winnable fight, one. And two, we really just have to slow this process down till after the election. Because that is, and Brad, thank you so much for the number to call your senators is 202-224-3121. And obviously you guys all have access to the Google box. So Bob, thank you so much for being here. I feel energized. Okay. I'm going to be spamming my senators all weekend and next week. Tweeting, right? Also tweet at them,
Mhm.
social, everything, not just calling.
Yep.
Is there anything else that we missed before we let you go back to your very important activities of saving the Supreme Court?
Well, no, I think that we just have to also keep hope. Resistance has to include joy and hope. Like, we had a go-go band play as part of our protest yesterday in Washington, D.C., because go-go is the local music of Washington, D.C. And just seeing people dance and keep up their energy. Don't let this fight beat you. Don't let yourself fall into a pit of despair, because even if we lose this fight and the next one and the next one, we are an intergenerational force, and we need to keep up our energy for ourselves, for the next generation, and just find ways to, create joy and camaraderie and resistance every day. And that's how we'll really win this fight.
Thank you so much, Bob.
Thanks,
Good
Bob.
with
Thanks for
us.
everything you do.
Oh, thank you.
Bye. I think that end of Bob's statement was actually just don't let the bastards get you down, which is an important phrase. I am not positive about this. I could be wrong, but I think Rihanna made that phrase famous in one of her songs first. I'm not positive.
Oh, well,
but,
that's actually some good. Thank you, Alex. I feel educated now.
Yeah. I mean, wrongly educated, but educated nonetheless.
Look, some education is better than nothing. Okay.
It does make it's a Latin phrase that does show up in Handmaid's Tale as well.
Nolite te bastards. What is the final part? All right, whatever. Just Google it, okay? Just Google everything we're saying.
Put it in the Google box. Rihanna did it first.
Of course.
The thing that Bob said there that I was gonna actually recommend a book, but then I thought, you know what? I don't know. I'll text that one to Bob.
Wait, now I need to know the book.
Well, I'm going to recommend it to you, obviously, and we can talk about books. But American Radicals: How 19th Century Protests Shaped the Nation by Holly Jackson is it. So it's important to recognize the magnitude of things like Barrett being, railroaded onto the court, the culmination of 40 years of right-wing reactionary organizing. But also at the same time, it's important to recognize an even bigger picture, that the reactionary pendulum swing back is in response to progressive forces trying to shape a more just nation and world, and that you can keep kind of zooming out and you see that we are the inheritors of a tradition of struggle, of making things more fair. And actually, because the people who buy ink by the barrel are usually the bastards that are getting people down, progressive stories are the ones that are forgotten on purpose. They're obliterated. And we need to tell those stories and find the joy and in being part of this thread that is long and actually has victories for a long time. And I think Bob was talking about, we need to fight like everything is on the line, because it is. But we also need to recognize that this Barrett fight isn't the actual fight. We need to win this Barrett fight, but it's a much bigger fight. The fight is that in times of crisis, great change can happen, and we can restructure the whole system. And we need to restructure the whole system because the bastards are getting us down because they own the system. They've got it locked tight in their greedy little hands. And we need to change that whole system. We can't, they feel like they've got it. They won because they're like, aha, we've got the opening to pack the court, and then there's nothing they can do. There's never nothing that we can do. It's in the bleakest time that we find the greatest hope towards the biggest change.
And that is exactly, I think that's always what we end up talking about on here, but that's important. This sense of creative political hope is what has always saved us. It's what's going to save us this time. It's what's going to save us 30 years from now when some existential Voldemort horrors pop up again. That is the way this
Stop
works.
talking about Tom Cotton like that. He's a man.
The resemblance is
fascist
uncanny,
man.
though. Okay. Look, I'm sorry, Tom. Wherever they even have the same first name. Like, what do you want from me?
Yeah. True.
Never trust a man that pale. And I don't care if that's a racially charged statement. It's just the truth.
Is Tom Cotton very pale?
Yeah.
Oh, I just think of, I literally just see fascism, like when it just replaces it with his writing in the New York Times, send in the troops to murder the citizens to hold them in line. Look, the stories don't change that much.
I mean, they really don't. And and you and I, again, we talk about this all the time. It's very shocking for me that we are raised in a public school system, which, to be fair, doesn't teach true history. But I have always found it interesting that we're taught enough resistance history you think that a lot of us would be a lot more aware of what's going on than we are, because we are taught about the resistance to fascism. We are taught about the abolitionist movement. Now, granted, it's washed down a lot, and our founding fathers are made to look like heroes that they weren't, but it doesn't change the fact that in the American story is this need to create a fairer world. And that fight has been won several times. And it's really important that we talk about the victories we've had so people don't fully cave into despair.
I agree. I am a little less sanguine. Is that the right word? You're the smart
Maybe.
one.
You're the smart one. Stop it.
Our school system is actually, like, public schools are amazing. But when the machine is just hammering away at the teachers and the curriculum is narrowed and they really do go after it on all fronts. The Texas school boards get taken over, and then the textbooks get changed to erase a lot of history, and a lot of history has to be searched out and found on our own. But I do believe the archetypes, you're right. We like that mythology, but we like to pretend that, it just happened. We've always been that way. We've been fighting for freedom, and there was no one fighting on the other side. And you're like, no, it was a struggle. That American Radicals is the story of about 50 years after the birth of the nation, 1776. And so the founding fathers are dying, and most of them have died. Lafayette is one of the only ones who is around still. Lafayette, who is one of the founding fathers who definitely has been erased from the history books. Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. has a statue of Andrew Jackson in it.
I never really thought about that irony. That's true.
Yeah. So he, I don't need to lionize him, but like Thomas Paine, Lafayette, and some others were of one side and one part of the history of this country. But this country has another side, a side that has been fighting to protect the rights of the privileged few, and at the time of the creation of the country, that included the right to own people. 50 years later, they're still fighting against slavery. And there's this huge progressive sort of movement. And a lot of the Black-led abolitionist movement has been just totally whitewashed out of our history books, right? The only time you hear about it is, and then a white savior came in, and far be it for me to not say John Brown is an awesome dude. He is. But there's a lot of work that was consistently happening. But I'm trying to get it, and I love this book for doing it, because it's that history is continuous. It's a multitude of little fights. And yes, there are some big names that make it through the history, but that's usually just so that we can tell it in a narrative that makes sense to people. Because if you try to tell it, you're like, well, okay, start with the fact that there's 10,000 people doing 10,000 things, and all of them are important. And in our case, it's millions of people standing up and fighting. So that's why I have hope. We're up against these evil people who are nihilists, who believe in nothing except themselves. And they believe the world ends when they end. And so they will accumulate everything they have, and they'll eat their own children if that means that they can extend their own-ness for a little bit. And we're going to always be fighting them. But they're the evil characters. And everybody, when you read stories to your children, you never read the stories that are like, and then the evil people accumulated all the wealth, and right, like they're never the heroes. They're never the heroes. And we have to own that and take that and remember that we are the heroes of the story, but it's going to be all of us fighting together, and then we can win. And they might think that they'll win when they win one specific skirmish. Well, then we'll just knock the whole board over and start a different game.
Because there are so many more of us than there are of them. And this is, I think, my big transition as an activist, when I was a baby activist who was like just terrified that the planet was burning. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of anxiety to think, oh, I, as a 17-year-old, have to figure out how to cure the whole world. But when you really get that it's millions and billions of us, after these like one very niche population of eccentric, horrible individuals, you really get how much power we have, because we all, and there is a reason we call ourselves Solidarity Live, we all have so much more in common with each other than they have in their weapons that they're like coming after us. This business of profiting off of the poor, I'm not going to say it's new as a concept, but it's relatively new in the way it exists today, right? The extractive healthcare, extractive climate practices. It wasn't that long ago where climate change was a bipartisan issue. But we have this very evil crew of people that we now have to bypass to get to the solutions of making this a better world.
And defeat. We have to defeat them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why in diversity of tactics, anyone who poo-poos voting should be eschewed. Because if you believe in doing all of the things, you got to do all of them, including voting. And yes, the lesser of two evils is less evil. That doesn't mean that that's your guiding principle. You fight for the biggest good, but we're not always offered the choice that we want. So you organize on the playing field that you have. And as Bob said, you never stop organizing. People who put so much faith in politicians that they don't vote as making a statement are the biggest marks in the whole game. All politicians are a means to an end. All of them. Just because your person didn't get to be on the one that you're voting for, you're like, it doesn't matter. The people who think that, you know, they say, oh, well, voting doesn't matter. They're the ones who put an enormous amount of power in politicians. Of course, voting matters. It's just like anything else that you do. Politics is just one of the playing fields that we engage on, the narrative playing field, which the right-wing fascists really understand the power of narrative, that if you tell the story one way, it's really hard to get that back, which is why people like, it's crushing to me to picture, you know, the depression of a young person who believes that they themselves have to overcome, the enormous systems of destruction that are leading to climate change. You know, that like and I'm all into people should do what they want on this. Like they should recycle and they should reduce and they should reuse, but that's propaganda that could actually defeat the extractive industries. Like plastic is really not recyclable. We're not going to defeat climate change at an individual level. And they want people to believe that it's all a personal choice or an individual thing. It's not. It's only when we all work together and do all of the things that we can actually transform the future, which is what we're talking about, is building a better future for ourselves and for our children and their children. And that's what solidarity is. It's an anti-nihilism. It's a belief that when I end, it all doesn't end. And in fact, because of that, I have faith that my actions are meaningful, because I have comrades in the struggle who I know will pick up a torch once it falls. And this is the point. This is why I have the deep-seated hope that we will win, is because, yes, they're going to do everything they can to grind us down. But when we stand together and remind each other that there's like 17 of them and there's billions of us, then you start seeing the stakes in the right way.
And I love that you say that, Alex, because personal anecdote for you guys. I had a friend from high school come up last weekend. Don't worry, it was very COVID safe. Don't get mad at me. I'm very lonely, okay? I'm socially isolated. Anyway, so we're talking about high school and like...
I believe in your socially distanced and in your that you're doing everything that you should, guided by the science. We have to take care of ourselves.
We do,
on all levels.
Well, exactly. And I'm sure everyone feels this way. When you do see a friend now, it's so lovely. It's like, wow, this is what normal life was like. But we're talking about high school and I'm like, yeah, it's weird. I don't feel like I've changed at all since high school. She's like, you were kind of an asshole in high school, actually, always picking fights with the boys in government class and like yelling at people about politics. And I was wondering, and I was like introspecting, why am I not like that anymore? And I realized, because when you find your activist family and you find the people that are in the fight with you, it does turn you into a much more positive person, because you have this feeling, Alex, of what you're saying, that like, okay, this isn't all on a couple people. This is a family and a team of people who are doing this work together. And it's a global family. It's a global team. And it really, there's no way you don't join this fight and meet all those incredible human beings and don't feel transformed by the experience and hopeful about the things we're doing, to a point where like, I can't even remember that super negative 16-year-old that this woman was referring to, but I believe it because it's a different thing when you're not doing it alone. Have you ever undergone anything like that?
I used to wear Jinko jeans, so I've undergone a lot of things like that. I mean, when you're 16, a lot of things that I think that's exactly right. I think the deeply isolating part of American culture is one of the most traumatic things.
Yes.
And I think when we're growing up, it's already a sort of traumatic, but, like by nature. So it's just part of what happens. But really, this is a unique thing to America, that we really start beating it into people right around them, that you're all on your own. You're on your own.
Yes.
You got to do it all on your own. And that's a newish thing. And it's really in service of selling stuff.
Oh, totally.
And so like, once you overcome that a bit and you realize that, you've got people who are standing with you, I think something that comes along with that is you lose a lot of your fear of failure, because you realize that catastrophic failure is not that relevant for most things. Like if you're a nuclear engineer, then remember catastrophic failure. Cascading failures is a real thing. But other than that, go out and try things. And if it doesn't work, generally it's like, okay, well, status quo it was. And then you can try again. You can dust yourself off and try again. And that's a really empowering thing to realize, along with that you have this immense power as a person, but it's really only fully realized when you're standing with others in solidarity. And then that if you fall down, someone will help you up. Or a lot of people know that it's not, I think I've said this before, but it's really important to me to remember as well. It's not a sprint. It's not a marathon either, though. It's a relay race. And so when you get tired, you pass the baton, and then take your moments and take care of yourself, and then come back in, because the worst thing and what a lot of the propaganda is aimed at doing is burning people out. Well, I couldn't fix everything, so therefore I'm not going to try to do anything.
Yes. And I've seen it a million times over, Alex. I know you have too, of people who enter into a political or an activism space with a sense of grandiosity, maybe, or over expectation, and then burn out, flame out, and leave entirely. And that's not a sustainable way for us to create change. We are allowed to be human beings. And this is something that, if I could create my perfect future, it would be a civic space which just includes full humans, and where it's not this idea of like a political or a non-political person. We're all political people by virtue of living in this society. The question is, are you advocating for your political interests or not? And unfortunately, we have a system which has been so good at freezing out middle class and working class people that the people that primarily participate right now are millionaires. Like, the class breakdown of Congress still shocks me. I don't know why. I should be used to it. But does it shock you a little bit?
Yeah, every once in a while when I have like this glimmer, but it can be in a negative place. And then I have to remember El Pueblo Unidos Jamás Será Vencidos, that the people united can never be defeated. Because every once in a while I'm like, man, this is just a bunch of billionaires controlling a bunch of millionaires who are fighting each other, and you're just choosing, which, but that is their playing board. We're not playing that game, but that's real. Like, billionaires fighting other billionaires to tilt the system as much as possible to their advantage. And what the people have to do is flip the whole board over when there's no way for us to win a game. You don't play that game.
Yes.
You flip the board and play a different game. But it is amazing that, the amount of times that I've heard the donor class or the basically the people who call a lot of the shots on things, and I sit through their PowerPoints. And it's generally a lot of like rich people saying, well, actually what not rich people think is this or that. And you're like, well, you could just get people and ask them. Just go. But our political system has been distorted for a while in service of the rich. So it's not a surprise that that's the way it is. And again, I think we're seeing a lot of movement the other way. It's just, you have to be able to see it from the right angle, and keep fighting. We're going to keep fighting the Barrett fight. We're going to fight on this election. It's not just about Trump. It's about McConnell and his weird laugh. Did you see that?
Oh, that was weird.
Weird man. That weird face thing he did. It's a picture of nihilism. It should be right next to nihilism in the book, in the dictionary. But I take a lot of wisdom from the Big Lebowski. And, are these guys Nazis, Walter? He's like, no, Donnie, they're nihilists. They're cowards. And I remind myself of that all the time. I do think we're fighting fascism, but it's a very nihilistic thing. And at the root of it is a deep, deep cowardice to not face the struggle that is existence, and to just throw up your hands and be like, oh, the world's on fire. Well, I should go to Burning Man and get another golden yacht then, instead of saying, as a people, as a community, of a kind, let's figure out a way out of this, and where everybody can actually share in the benefits of productivity, except the billionaires.
Yeah, because it's so possible. And I know we talk about this all the time, but it is so feasible to live in a world where people have a right, like an actual right to honest labor and honest compensation. And I hate to use the word right to work because they appropriated it for that terrible amendment. But anyways, but where people have healthcare, where people live in a world where the climate is safe and the air is clean and the water is clean. These are not huge asks.
No, they're not. And when you start looking at it, it's also really simple policy, like, oh, well, what are we going to do? And you're like, stop subsidizing oil. And you're like, oh, well,
imagine
that seems, and you're like, it's really, really easy. Just stop giving taxpayer dollars to these shitty companies that couldn't ever exist without our taxpayer dollars. And they will wither on the vine, which is why they spend so much time creating Barretts in laboratories to get onto the Supreme Court to ensure their power continues. But let's just stop giving them our money. No more money for coal. No more money for oil. This is easy. How do we do healthcare? Oh, easy. We just give people healthcare. No more money for the insurance industry. No more money for the pharmaceutical corporations. We do it all anyways on our own. The largest, creator of prescription drugs, of pharmaceuticals, R&D, is the U.S. taxpayer. We also are the largest buyer of pharmaceuticals, the U.S. taxpayer. So just cut out the corporate grift in the middle and we're looking pretty good. The solutions are actually quite elegant and simple. It's the kludges, the ludicrous kludges that you have to come up with to continue the current system that actually make no sense. If you want to talk about real efficiency, then I know we don't have that much time, but just for a minute, the originalist arguments are so mind-numbingly stupid that we have to spend a second on the kludge. What Barrett says is that the document of the Constitution is sacrosanct. Hundreds of years ago, these guys got it right. And you're like, they leached themselves when they got sick because they thought their humors were unbalanced. They were not gods. They were dudes who wore wigs because they didn't like that they were bald. I'm not judging them all. The ones who owned people, I do judge. But, they're just people. And they took some Enlightenment ideas. And I love the blossoming and the continuation of knowledge, which is the opposite of the originalist argument. Like the Constitution and the Declaration and they were built on the Enlightenment, which was built on furthering and then expansion of human understanding. But to have the dumbest argument that the only thing you do is you look at this 100-year-old document and that's what you rule everything on. What did they mean then? They have to come up with the super precedent idea. Right? Like, well, there's the Constitution and then there's super precedents, and super precedents are the things that are so big that you can't overturn them, even if the Constitution didn't write them down, including things like, nuclear submarines, which clearly weren't in the Constitution. But do you see how dumb, that's the most complex thing versus our reading of things, which is just that document was written a long time ago and we've made it better over time. Mm-hmm. And we have to continue making things better over time because time matters.
Time matters in the society we live in matters. We don't live in the technology is new, cultures are new. All these founding fathers, for all their freedom of religion, were still largely white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. These were people that still had British accents
And owned people.
and owned people. Yes.
Owned people. They thought that that was okay. And women did not have the right to do anything. So like, yeah, they were super wrong about a lot of things. They did a good job of reading Enlightenment thinkers. This is my biggest problem with the originalists. It's just garbage. And I like arguing with people on Twitter about it. Like the Constitution is basically an amalgamation of, you got some, and they're pretty young at the time, but they had access to the works of the Enlightenment. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Look at, this is good. I knew I didn't want to pay taxes to that dumb king over there. And that was a good idea. Like the idea that people are equal, but they didn't actually get the whole thing. They didn't get it in one. There were people who were arguing in 1776 that you couldn't have freedom and liberty be your watchwords and also own people and have chattel slavery in existence in a country that's supposedly founded on freedom. Those people existed, Black abolitionists, led by Black abolitionists at the time. They lost that battle. So like, there's no way it was perfect. And I'm like, it's just outrageous to me. The anti-intellectualism and the stupidity of the argument of originalism should be that if you even say those words, you should be disqualified from being a judge, not just a justice, but a judge. No judge should believe that a hundreds of year old document is sacrosanct in that manner.
Well, and as Bob pointed out, she hasn't been a judge that long. So
yeah. Oh, she couldn't even name the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment.
Well, and look at the one she forgot, a right to assemble.
No.
Great.
So sign us off with the hopeful solidarity, Jocelyn. And thank you for putting together such a great show today. This was definitely Jocelyn's show. I'm just along for the ride.
Oh, stop that. I am, look, you guys might know this or might not, but Alex and Bob are literally 2 of my favorite people. So it is so lovely to just really wrap your mind around the fact that this is a bleak time, but there is a lot of hope. There is a lot we're fighting for. There are a lot of things that are going well. Public opinion is very progressive right now. We have so much organizing power and so much to look forward to, regardless of what happens in the coming weeks and months. And we really just have to stay focused on the things that we control and on being there for each other, because through solidarity, we really can do all things. Am I wrong about that? I feel like that's how we've done all things.
That's the only way we can do things.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope you have a lovely week fighting the bad guys, and we'll see you next week.